Welcome to A Partial Perspective. My name is William, and this first episode of this season's summer podcast series is with Dr. Antoinette Jackson. She's the new chair of the Applied Anthropology Department at the University of South Florida. In this conversation, we talk about her newest book, The Other Side of Leisure, which discusses leisure activities both in state parks as well as other activities that African Americans have engaged in that have been different from that of the regular way that we tend to talk about leisure, tourism, and all of the things that we kind of take for granted. In this discussion, she talks about her critical race theoretical perspective and how she applies it. So it's great to get to talk to you.
Finally, how
Yeah.
we get this? If we get this in, it takes a
Yeah.
pandemic, huh?
Yeah, it does. Now everybody's available.
Yes.
Congratulations again. Like, I haven't seen you since the formal announcement, but congratulations on being the new chair of the anthropology department at USF.
Oh, thank you so much. It is quite an honor and it's quite a task ahead. But I'm excited.
Yeah. The fact that it's like passing on to the new chair in the middle of a pandemic, like how's that whole transition been?
Yes, the transition, we're in the transition phase right now. And like I said, when I wrote my kind of statement to the group, when I took on the job or ran for chair, I had no idea that we'd be in this situation. So it's kind of surreal, but now it's enabling me to see the positives and the negatives, because it was going to be a situation of change because we were going to transition to a new chair. And now, we are in the middle of change by definition. So it makes it easier. This word change doesn't have to just rely solely on the transition to a new chair. We're in change. So it takes a little bit of the pressure off of the notion of change. And so in looking at it that way, it's an interesting scenario.
It definitely seems like it.
Yeah, but it definitely, changes, now I'm thinking pre-post coronavirus in terms of, or we're not even post yet. So just what is it what's post going to look like? So, It just adds to the stakes of, the transition. And I'm even more appreciative of the team that's in place right now until the official transition ends, which is when I start in August. All the work that they have to do now in the middle of this crisis as it's unfolding. That's it's quite a effort.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it would be to be starting with either like teaching appointments now or heading into graduate school now.
Yeah.
Like what's it going to be like for the new cohort that comes in?
Yes.
Like, do you have like a handle on that as well?
No, because everything is up in the air for the new cohort. Not everything is up in the air, but in terms of what to plan for beyond, even beyond summer. Like right now, we're just even thinking about what will fall look like. Just what will fall look like is perhaps won't be a normal fall. So the fact that you can't give people any definitives, or I definitely can't give anyone a definitive at this moment. It makes it frustrating, especially for people who are just coming into a situation. I think for people who are already in it, then it's another adjustment, a huge one, but it's still an adjustment. Coming in, you want a little bit more assurances about what things are going to look like so you can, plan and get yourself together and enter a new situation. But right now, like I said, I think I just can be available for people and be flexible in terms of the things that they are concerned about, the things that they are going to need on a personal level and also a professional level. I think it's more emphasis than on just making sure people feel that they can have the flexibility to do those things and manage their personal life, and since so many things are in flux. So having that kind of being ready to be open to the things people need in that regard.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it, because it's interesting how we will usually split between like personal needs versus like academic needs. And, like they're like separate things, but like, they're all by definition like all together and
Yes.
affecting each other.
Yeah.
Like even thinking about how I wanted to like approach talking to you, like
Right.
I was thinking of it like that, like, oh, personal, like what's your experiences like with COVID? But then like by definition, everything sort of
It
like tangles
merges
together.
together now.
It does.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And yeah, so that's the only thing to make sure that we understand. I think that's the only thing that's kind of consistent is that everybody is managing on so many different levels and nothing is really stable on any level. And you have to allow people that room to do it,
Yeah.
to make adjustments because we're all trying to make them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's so true.
yeah.
And it reminds me of so your new book, it just came out this year.
Yes. Yeah.
Um and it's on, so it's called The Other Side of Leisure, Heritage, Tourism, and Race.
Yes.
And in it, you're talking about just that, like leisure, and about national parks,
Mm-hmm.
about like you mentioned the Green Book, which
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know too much about. I just
Yes.
remember that there was a movie,
Yes. Oh, yeah.
and that was yeah. What's your take on the movie and I guess that concept of the Green Book?
Well, the publisher asked me because the movie came out when I was at the end. The book wasn't going into publication, but I had to
Yeah,
add I needed to make a comment, and so in that
yeah,
chapter there's a little bit of a comment, but really, the movie is just one perspective on and it's really not about the Green Book. The movie
right.
is not about the Green Book. So first of
Uh,
all, there is no comment because
oh,
they use that as a way a hook.
right.
And so the foundation of the movie is really not about the Green Book. So, and they casually mention the Green Book. So I
Oh
really
wow.
can't say that they do anything other than people who may not have heard the word Green Book like you, but will say, "Oh, what is that?" And other
Hmm.
than that, they don't really interrogate it. They don't really give it any kind of full credence of
Hmm.
what that really meant. For Black travelers or people who were excluded from places of, hotels or restaurants or places of business. They don't really go into the function of the Green Book, the really big function of the Green Book and how strategic it was. That's not what the movie is about. So,
Yeah, like in the book, you talk about the Green Book, how it pulling from your book and information of safe places to eat, sleep, tour, have fun,
yes.
go to the restroom, get gas. So it offered what you called like solutions to issues of segregation, but there were solutions on basically like a do and do not list almost.
Yeah.
So like within that, you're also talking about the larger like what Black families and individuals were allowed kind of to do, maybe implicitly, maybe a little bit more explicitly. And you talk about the national parks, and you also talked about how I guess the national park partially didn't want to like incorporate the findings of like the Biscayne National Park
Yeah.
about like the interactions with like sort of the African American families. I
Yeah.
don't know if you could talk about that
Yeah,
decision and
yeah. One of the things, so the Green Book does give a definitive roadmap to Black travelers, particularly their audience was Black travelers, and how they could, find places that were welcoming to them in all basics of life, the basic necessities of life as a traveler. But it also, in a broader sense, was a critique of the larger system. It was a critique from Black folks' perspective of places that they were excluded by not being in the Green Book. People, the people who wrote into that and gave places that were welcoming and of a certain standard, they were saying they were also critiquing places who did not invite them or they weren't welcome. So it was like
right.
by default a critique. If you are in the Green Book, then an evaluation has been made of you
Yeah.
by a whole group of constituents. People don't kind of see it as, I don't think people often talk about it in that way. And when I think about the National Park Service, and they had a special issue on the National Park Service in one of the years of the Green Book, and that for national parks not to be on that list meant that that they had been evaluated as not making themselves welcoming or creating a safe space for Black folk to enjoy the park or use the park. So,
Right.
when I bring it up in the context of the National Park Service, I also bring it up as a form of critique and how that people really did evaluate the choices available to them and look around at the national parks and say who does what at these parks and list you in the book accordingly. So that was a interesting thing. And in parks, the Key Biscayne National Park down here in Florida, one of the things that parks, and I found across the board, is that they may not want to talk about their history of segregation. And they often structured these parks, particularly the southern parks, where they had, black area, black access, white access. And what was interesting about the place down here in Florida is that they actually had a road that was only for black people to enter the park. And they had segregation was so prevalent that they just really down to a road. Now, it's always surprising to me how far segregation goes, but when I knew that they had a road into the park that was the black road, it was just, and the road is still there. They don't interpret that, of course. That's not part of the interpretation. And the visitor center itself sits on what was the area of the Black Beach. And so there's no interpretation of that in the visitor center or anything to do with signage, at least not to the last time I had gone there. And I had a student though the park actually asked that we do oral histories of the Black involvement with that beach. And because they knew, they obviously know, that the history of the park, but even after the research was completed so far, they have not included that in any interpretation of the site. So, which is kind of discouraging, not to have that erasure of that history, even if it told a kind of a negative story of the park's position, but at least it would give you some perspective of what was going on at that time and highlight the fact that Black people did use that beach and beaches all over the place. They actually were using national parks to the best that they could.
Right. I wonder if putting the visitor center at that specific spot is a sort of form of erasure, because you're basically putting a visitor center at a part of the beach that belonged to, was meant for the use of African Americans.
Yeah.
And now it's like we're opening it up to everybody, but you're also erasing the one part that used to belong to them.
And I don't know if they, in my conversations with them, I don't know if they built it with that erasure in mind, but the fact that they aren't interpreting it in the present still does the same thing. Even if that's not what, or they weren't conscious of, or they just, didn't address it at that time when they actually physically built it, to not have it in conversation right now is a problem. It's very problematic, because that perpetuates the erasure every day that they don't say anything. Exactly. So
I can imagine them first building it there, trying to say we're trying to highlight this importance and we want to put the visitor center, but at the same time there's a discomfort around it it comes out. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the not a lot, but the parks that I talk about in the book, I think it is that level of discomfort. Do we talk about this negative part of our history when now we have the park open to everybody and all those kinds of things? What do we do about that aspect of parks history? And I think some parks really are, they're confused about that, or they don't know quite how to approach it, and then they are in some ways considering their primary constituents and the comfort level of the people that are their primary visitors, whether, that's what I've been told as to some reason why some of the parks may not have that kind of story, the story of segregation in the park's role at this point, because it makes some visitors, non-Black visitors, maybe uncomfortable with that history.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Even thinking about the fact that Black visitors had a separate entrance, it I don't know, it gives a different twist to how divided and separate the experience must have been.
Yes.
And I know in your research you've done a lot of interviews with individuals. I don't know if there's anything that sticks out in terms of that experience and what that was like, because I know that you also had stories from your own family from New Orleans that's in the book a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, you mean the story of just having to experience segregation in and of itself, whatever form it was taking, like not only just
Right.
the road. Yeah, it's interesting because, and that's one of the motivations for the book for me, was because even people who directly, at least the people that I've interviewed who directly experienced segregation in that form, that extreme form where you really were separated, separate entrances, separate places on the bus, separate, parks, pools.
Mm.
What stands out is that the things that they did do in terms of their recreation, in terms of their activities, in terms of their access and things like that. That was the emphasis when people were telling me about their experiences, and my overlay in the book is to overlay their discussion of their experiences actually experiencing places of fun or leisure, but juxtaposing that against the fact that, yeah, legally there was segregation. Legally, people couldn't go to a certain place. The Green Book highlights that in even more strategic fashion. So most people didn't talk to me directly about what they couldn't do. Unless
Yeah.
I because I was interested in that juxtaposition, really had to kind of pull that out. I mean, they may have made an off statement like we didn't go there, but if I didn't probe and say why didn't you go there, like like what was, then they would get into it a little bit more. But they would say we didn't go there, but we were doing whatever.
Right.
So it's interesting that people, that's not the forefront and that's not what they wanted to pass on. I think especially people in my more personal level, I think they were more interested in making sure the world seemed accessible as broadly as possible for their children or the people that were coming after them, as opposed to keeping it in a small context. So I think that was the reason. Not that they didn't have lots of critique, but it's just, and that was the tension.
Yeah. Like their lives can't all be about critiquing
Yeah.
what you can't do. Like, yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. So, they wanted to pass on what they were experiencing. And that's what I try to do in the book too, is really kind of show all the things that people were doing, all the things they were doing to critique it and work around or work in parallel to what was going on. And that's often that's silence too, because people either assume they weren't doing anything at all, or they don't have any idea what the nuances of what actually was going on the other side of this, this systemic segregation. They don't really have any conversation about that.
Yeah.
So I try to show that.
Yeah. What was like the most impactful or maybe surprising tidbit of information or maybe even story that you learned in your research for this book?
Yeah. I think the most, well, first of all, I think from my own personal family level, when I asked I realized even as a young person, I was like at places that I had no idea was the history, like of the Lincoln Beach. Like I would say, my aunt lived right near there, and I had no no association until concurrently I went back and started doing this, when I started remembering, I saw that, but I didn't, it was no context to me, where the beach was, or where the levee was. And it just didn't, I didn't think about it in that way. And just going back down those same roads again with this whole different understanding and historical perspective was really, it's kind of, it blew my mind in a lot of different ways.
Such a shift, I imagine.
Yeah. And then to hear my parents just talk about something, I say, hey, you know about Lincoln Beach? Oh yeah, we did. Then they would tell me about a party, whatever they were doing on the beach. And I was like, what? And so I was like, wow, it became very personal, because at one point I was just kind of looking at it outward. And then the other thing that was surprising to me was when I did the work in Kentucky, was with the caving, looking at things that are not historically or typically associated with Black folk in leisure or black folk in parks or anything like that. The Mammoth Cave and the
Right.
history of the caving families, the black caving families, and the tours and the lodging and all the things they were doing around caving
Yeah.
way before the national park even became a park at that site
Wow.
was very humbling, actually, because it was quite, quite a history, and not to have that known in a broader sense. It's just sad and an opportunity, I guess, at the same time.
Can you explain more about like the caving?
Yeah, the Mammoth Cave is like one of the largest, and it's in Mammoth Cave is in Kentucky, or closer to Bowling Green or the Tennessee. Well, it's in between actually, the Tennessee border and Louisville, and so it's one of the largest caving systems in the world. And at one point, it was used as a mining company had during the war used it for salt pepper pewter mining, and then so they used it when it had black folk were in the caves, doing mining for the salt pepper, and then black folk learned the caving system, and they created their own. They were actually tour guides for people going down into those mines early on, before, like I said, before Mammoth Cave became a national park, where it was just a series of caves that they would had their own lodging companies. They would, have people come and stay over there at the Hello Hotel, which was listed in the Green Book in the early 30s.
Wow.
The Ranford family had a tour operation that went on, and there was several black families who were history of black leadership in or black tour guides in caves. But the one family had like 7, 8 generations of people in their family that were led the tours. They learned from their parents, grandparents, uncles, and led tours through those caves. And then when the National Park Service came, it was during segregation when they took over in the 40s or something. They did not. They changed all the tour guides, all the things to white tour operators, and
Yeah. Wow.
didn't continue. They broke the chain or they stopped that
Wow.
family from touring, And they do
So
have an
much knowledge
exhibit.
lost.
Yeah, they have an exhibit in the park about the black family and caving story, but they don't really, again, critique the park.
Yeah.
Why is it that, now this seems like more of an anomaly in the present day to have black association with this cave in touring and access, when it was commonplace at one point in the history of the caves. So, and then and then black folk actually constructed the national park as far they were part of these teams of the CCC that went in during the Depression and worked to build the Mammoth Cave National Park in and of itself. And one interesting thing about that is they put them on that job. More black people worked in the CCC in that Kentucky Mammoth Cave area because it was remote. They thought it was remote, away from, white folk, and they could stay, black white folk felt safer having black folk that remotely located. But they did all of the labor, actually, much of the labor to build the park itself, the trails and the things that all go along with a national park. So that part of the story too, that labor is kind of underplayed. So not only were they in the tour area, they were actually, constructing the national park itself.
That's really
So
incredible.
it's just so much layered history about Mammoth Cave. But if you go to Mammoth Cave today, and look around at who's doing caving or all, you would not just come away with that magnitude of that story at all.
Yeah.
Which is the biggest, is a very big surprise to me, because most people will say caving.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah, that's so true. Like caving, it's like it's a, I guess, a part of a local tourist industry that you don't really think about.
Yeah.
It's so, I guess it's so particular to so few places that it's
Yeah.
incredible, and but not surprising to see the kind of knowledge that was built up over like like you said, like 7, 8 generations, and then
Yeah.
as soon as like the U.S. government tries to nationalize it, it just sort of like the national institutional policies surrounding segregation sort of like breaks that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, so just another kind of, narrative about, the parks and segregation and the choices they made
Hmm.
at the time, at the inception of some of the parks.
Yeah.
And which goes into my bigger art question is like, that is why I'm concerned why they are asking why certain groups of people aren't coming to parks. But these
Right.
kinds of stories and information about the park's founding or the park's history won't come to the forefront in terms of these questions. Is so I think it definitely needs to be a historical addition to some of those kind of questions, and before you just go off and kind of strategize all these um, reasons why people aren't doing something when you don't have the historical context for creating it a
Right.
lot of that in the first place. So.
Yeah, it sounds like creating that historical context, especially from the perspective of African Americans who are experiencing that and whose stories often don't get told. I think that's been like an important part of, I think, both your books.
Yes.
So your first book, Speaking for the Enslaved,
Mm-hmm.
in 2012, like that one also like puts that alternate perspective that
Yes.
isn't really alternate, but it's not the one that we hear all the
Here,
time.
right, exactly.
So like, how would you? Because you've introduced that as like a critical race
Mm-hmm.
perspective. Like how would you uh, sort of define critical race theory in terms of how you use it?
Yeah. In terms of how I use it, I think that the main thing is that, especially within the history of anything to do with the United States, for sure, you cannot have a conversation about what people were not doing, or any in anything in any context without understanding um, the legal ramifications of slavery and segregation. And
Hmm.
so a critical race perspective always brings that to play when you're analyzing or you're talking about people in the present, in their current associations. How did that community get started, or why? What's going on with that community today, without actually bringing in the role of race uh, exclusion practices, which is mostly in this. The new book is really highlighting exclusion, which is critical race, in the fact that people were excluded based on racial, arbitrary racial um, decisions and classifications. And without having that as your core understanding, I think you just basically end up missing, just missing
Hmm.
the frame of the picture, because it's just no
Yeah.
understanding it without filtering it through, because everything has been filtered through that context for especially people who were segregate victims marginalized through segregation practices. So without and slavery, enslavement, whether they were enslaved or not, the history of
Hmm.
that has filtered into the laws and
Hmm.
into through segregation and many of the things that are still in place today. So without understanding that, I think you either try to reinvent the wheel, or you come up with different explanations for things that are weak. They really
Yeah.
lack uh, the foundation of really putting it all together. So from my perspective, um, making sure you understand that as your base is just a requirement, because that is what everything, whether we like it or not, in the U.S. anyways, have been built
Hmm.
on those systems. Um,
Yeah.
and like I said,
Yeah.
no matter how much research I do, the more I find out, especially like segregation or the ramifications of laws that came into existence during slavery, it's just so clear. Like, it's just so many things that were predicated on the inferiority of Black folk or the superiority of whiteness, in order to create um, spaces and places where people can move and operate in the
Right.
law and everything else. So, and that's the thing about the book too. I talk about geography, architecture, law,
Hmm.
and social controls that people were in place that kept people from accessing things. So I look at it from an even wider frame than the enslavement in the first book.
Right. Yeah, and it makes sense because especially how you're using critical race theory. I mean, and how it is used, it's like contextual in terms of drawing in a history of institutions, of policy practices, and ultimately the narratives of the people who are being directly affected by
Mm-hmm.
them. And yeah, like because those are the narratives that aren't really being communicated most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense that you're missing out and like you said, like filtering through and just like
Mm-hmm.
not getting those stories. And yeah.
Yeah, and it seems benign if you don't add the human component, the actual lived experience of people who
Mhm.
were on the other side of those things. When people say just move on or let's go, everybody wants to move on, but you can't um, totally move on unless you actually acknowledge what's still embedded in the
Mhm.
system.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think having human people's stories traced through shows like what that looks like to
Mhm.
have that entrenched in a family's history or a community's history or park's history.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that, well, a few things stood out to me about your first book,
Uh-huh.
but I think one of the things that I remember walking away from your critical race discourse class with was kind of the usage of the term like enslaved African versus slaves,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
which whenever I see anything like a new movie pops up on Netflix or a comedian or anything in popular media, they still use like slaves to
Yeah.
denote like enslaved Africans. So I want to know if you could speak on like sort of the importance that you see in using that language
Mm-hmm.
uh, versus the like one that's used in popular media.
Yeah. Yeah, it always makes me cringe
Yeah,
when, somebody says slave this
same.
or those are slaves or whatever. And because to me, and I impress upon this in the book, it's like it's almost a re-enslavement at that point,
Hmm.
because already you've stripped whoever you're calling, giving that label to, you're stripping them of ever having been a person other than enslaved in the first place. Like this person was
Hmm.
always that position.
Right.
And there's no room between the person and the status that was imposed on them. And so to
Mm-hmm.
keep doing that, you just continue to place equality between a status that was forced upon a group of people and by law and custom and all levels of things. You continue to do that in the present, and you do
Yeah.
not acknowledge that that was a process that happened.
Hmm.
And when you say enslaved, then you have to say something was done to create that, and it
Right.
opens up the frame. And who was enslaving? Who was doing that?
Hmm.
And who were the people that was done to? Who was doing what to that group of people? So you force the conversation to be a lot more critical.
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
and and so that's why I really have to call people when if they keep using the term slave as opposed to enslaved, because then we are not in the right conversation, especially for the 21st century. We need
Right.
to be in a different conversation around that period or what happened, and even when going forward to people that are enslaved in this time period and for different reasons. So you need to make sure you hold the system accountable and the process accountable and up to the frame, as well as who this happened to. And so
Hmm.
that's why I think it's critical that people have those kind of conversations and don't automatically collapse that title or that circumstance as equivalent to the people who that was happening to.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's so important, and that's something that's so mindless within our language that we don't
Yeah,
even
we
think
don't.
about.
Yeah, and
You know.
language, is what sets the tone, and and that's the thing. We keep it as natural. The more you say slave and equate that with black, then it really naturalizes that more and more.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's not productive.
No. No. Not at all. Yeah.
So,
And it really I think something that came out in your new book that you said that sort of made me think about something was how you mentioned the belief in the 1928 New Orleans that the presence of black swimmers would depress property values.
yeah.
And I don't know, I had an interesting thought reading that, and it's like how our cultural beliefs about things and our evaluation of them lead to like these very like materialistic results that we then use to say like it legitimizes it. So back then it was like property value decreases. We see those numbers happen.
Yeah.
So therefore,
Right.
having Black swimmers around here isn't a good thing.
Yeah.
And it reminded me in some ways, in a very different way, of like the COVID-19 epidemic
Yes.
or pandemic, where everyone bought toilet paper.
It's
It's like everyone had the value, probably that like issues with hygiene, who knows, like.
Yeah.
But either way, people are buying out all the toilet paper, and
Yeah.
now there is no toilet paper.
Yes.
Like even going to the store,
Yeah, I know.
I can't get toilet paper.
Yeah,
It's always
right.
gone.
It's crazy. Yeah.
And so now that there's no toilet paper, I think there's a belief that we need toilet paper,
Right.
even though it's so arbitrary, you know.
Right.
It's just, I don't know, like values and like the material results of them
Yeah.
seem to like create this feedback loop
Yes.
where
Yeah.
we then believe in it even more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's a good, yeah, you know, that's a connection. That's definitely. The consumer nature of the consumerism around people's drive to exclude people.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
exclude
seriously.
something.
And you got your was it your bachelor's or your master's in business?
I have a master's in business.
Master's.
Yes.
Do you have an MBA?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that gives you like another perspective in seeing like what the market's looking like, or any of your analyses?
For the COVID-19?
Yeah.
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 I mean, I think the way it is now, I don't think anybody needs a business degree just to this is so extreme at this point. Yeah. The economics, I think from a business standpoint, if I was only, now this is a inverse. If I was only in my business mode, then, you know, I would be arguing, you know, the businesses want to get back in, they want to continue making money. I mean, that's the drive. That's what you do. So the people aspect would probably be a less of an emphasis. And we're seeing this in totality from my own lived experience, and then from an anthropological lens, you know, there's way more nuance to the argument. You just can't get back to work. Like, you know, so that simplicity of the business argument becomes like, it reminds me of, wow, that, you know, that I know that argument, and I know that perspective. And, you know, that's the knee-jerk thing in a capitalistic system, is that is what we lead with. How are we gonna get back to the economy? How are we gonna make money? How are we gonna, you know, and money, then everybody needs money, because we are our customer. Like, everything runs on money.
It does.
We work for money so we can do other things with the money. So we are all integrated into it. But this kind of pandemic or the crisis shows that, again, maybe we need to really rethink why we are, you know, so hooked into that money as the only driver of the money being the driver of everything. Yeah. And we're showing like other things are very important when you're in a pandemic that doesn't have to do with money. It has to do a lot with relationships and relating and trading. It's all kinds of other things you could do. Yeah. And I think it's highlighting, you know, it's really putting, you know, business on the trial again, because it's so many other ways to relate to get your family, corporations, and things in motion. It doesn't always have to be driven by money, but we're hooked now. So we now may have to really seriously rethink that again. Now, given this situation, it's another opportunity for change, and maybe some other modes will, you know, take hold. Yeah. You know, so we won't have to start all over every time some crisis hits, and then suddenly everybody's, you know, scrambling back to something that is more human.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Like, even now, the decisions to like open up the country or open up states again, like a lot of I guess public health professionals are saying like it's kind of premature to be talking
Yeah,
about that
yeah.
so far. But the thing that stood out to me was like recent statistics on like African Americans making up all like 8 of Richmond's coronavirus deaths, even
Yeah.
though they're like 48% of the
Yes,
city's
yes,
population.
yes.
And St. Louis, Missouri, it was similar. I think
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of the month, there was 19 deaths, all of them African American
Mm-hmm.
again. So it's just, yeah, like what do you think about those, like, yeah, those disparities and the fact that even in this, you could probably ultimately see the differences in experiences of people based off of race,
Yeah.
even in this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it definitely exposes the system again. Just what we were saying in the beginning, without a critical race lens,
Hmm.
all of this looks like odd or strange. But once you peel back that lens and or look through that lens, you can see the vulnerabilities in the system, the vulnerabilities of the histories of entire communities and people that have already always been there.
Yeah.
And a pandemic, this one exposes it to the extreme, all the way to actual death of a disproportionately amount of deaths. And it's not even the thing that's even more disconcerting is not even strictly that you may get the virus and because of your exposure maybe on frontline jobs that require you to be in interface and not safe.
Hmm.
But even if you get it, the other part is, which people have started to really critique, is that when you go to the hospital, you aren't
Hmm.
getting the care, like the
Yeah.
level of care, the differential in actual care. Once you make it to the facility that
Hmm.
could supposedly help you, there's so many disparities built into that system
Yeah.
that the disproportionate amount of people black folk dying in care, in care, and
Yeah.
again exposes this idea, the ideas people have around you know black bodies and health, and and what should or should not be offered to them, or
Yeah.
so it's just opening up the whole panorama again of what all of that means.
Right.
um,
Yeah, because those were already pre-existing like health disparities that
yes.
we've seen, and it's just playing out in
Hmm.
another way in
Yeah,
a lot of ways.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think this is an opportunity, like pandemic and the sheer numbers of people, that more people are focusing on it. So hopefully, the greater amount of focus will be some kind of change.
Yeah.
You know, that's the only hope of some of this, is that because of unfortunately, the sheer numbers of people and the amount of people that are now really, looking at this,
Mm.
maybe people can come together and figure out
Mm.
start more than a conversation, but just start some kind of actual active ways of getting, not having this happen again.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm thinking about like what does that change even look like? It's
hmm
it's it's one of those things that's been built up over so long. I mean, we've had these like statistics on health disparities have been around for probably hundreds of years now.
hmm
Like it's been so long that scholars and other like public health people have captured the fact that people of African descent in the United States are more prone to certain diseases. And for a while it was like it's probably biological that they're more
hmm
prone to it for whatever like inherent reason.
hmm
But the more time's gone on, the more that we've seen, well, no, it's not biological, because not all people of
right,
African descent
exactly.
have the same disparities.
hmm
In fact, when they migrate here to the United States, that's when those disparities
hmm
start in the next generation.
hmm
So in thinking about like what those changes would look like, it's almost I it's almost, yeah, unimaginable, because it would take this like really big fundamental shift in
yeah.
our attitudes about what, like, I don't know, people, I don't know, like how do we attend to their health in these like more holistic ways, rather than just saying we need to allocate money to this one endeavor and that's just it, you know?
Yeah, I think when I'm looking out across a lot of things have changed in the sense that the type of people in leadership, for example, it's several African American female mayors in places. And I think, when you, and if you look at the pockets of success where people are able to, are addressing these things in a more constructive and progressive manner, I think that's where the light should be shown on that more. And I think thinking and listening to these mayors who are particularly African American or Black folk who are, or people in underrepresented communities who are leading whole places as mayor or governors or wherever, to really pay attention and be mindful of the things they're asking for, the things they're seeing, the things they're looking across it in a very, like you already said, in a very broad manner, holistic manner, they have to look at it in a systems standpoint. So these people are seeing the resources they need. They're seeing the across the board of things that could help. And I think the more we pay attention to people who are in those kinds of positions of power or influence or decision-making capacities and see what they're seeing and asking for, I think that's where we need to start, because these people really, they're trying, they're solving a complex, problem, and they're often lacking the least, the least able to get the materials and things that they need. But I think more focus should be placed on what it is they're asking for, what it is, how are they strategizing about how to solve and do things, and especially if they had the resources, what else could they do? What else could they do? And I think they're limited in their resources, but not limited in their strategies. I think they really have good strategies and good ideas about what needs to be done, and more emphasis needs to be placed on that. That's the last place really kind of people, I see them interviewing people like, oh yeah, it's bad there. And that's like the interview on just, why is it that is, what do you think about what people are saying about why it's bad there? But I don't think to look at the strategies, the things that they're trying to put in place.
Right. Yeah. No, that's so true. It's way more complicated. Yeah.
But like I said, I think people are thinking of them, but though we don't place emphasis on those, where we put the camera, where we put our energy into, to working with.
Yeah. That's so true.
Because like, the Como in New York, I mean, he's getting, he can take up a lot of oxygen. I mean, and he's New York, and it's, of course, that's a big platform, but like the mayor of Chicago, she has a daunting task too, and we don't have a briefing where we get that is not broadcast, or that is not our focus.
No, that's so true. Yeah,
about how she's putting it all together and thinking about it, and
how is she thinking about it?
Yeah, I think, well, from what I gather, again, she knows she's working with really a lot of the grassroots community level operations, because a lot of these in any anthropology, we know this, that these blanket one size fit all solutions about how to get the message out about how to protect yourself from or stay safe in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic and all of that messaging has to be tailored meet people where they are. You have to go to the churches, you have to go to the clubs, where the health, the beauty salon, wherever people hang out and feel that people of where they get their information from, that they feel that is trustworthy. You have to look at those channels. It's not the same channels sometimes as the national news, even maybe some of the local news stations. You have to go down maybe to a radio station level, like what are the stations and places where people are really paying attention. And that's what she's partnering with these kinds of really grassroots organizations to, at least even just to get the messaging across, that this is a problem for Black folk, first of all, that they need to be paying attention, and there are things that can be done, and then what are those kinds of needs in those particular communities, and because you're more at risk, what are those facilities that folk are going to be going to? And maybe their first line of going to may not be one of the major hospital, maybe one of the clinics in the area. Those are the places that may need to have the resources, because that's where the most people are going to be going, that may be contracted or need to be tested or whatever. So,
meeting people where they are.
Yeah, and transportation and all those things may not be that you can just jump in your car and go to a drive-through testing over, on the other side of town or wherever it is. It's not ever going to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. God. That's the other thing. It's like testing is so lacking all over the country.
Yeah.
And it's like you have to wonder if it's probably worse than we think it is, just because testing puts a limit on it.
Yes.
We can't really know right now.
Right. That's the big unknown that is looming over all of our heads, because we really don't know.
No, we don't.
How prevalent it is, or where the pockets, or not anything really.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Like preliminary studies, and I think LA said it could be as high as 4% of the population.
Yeah.
At least in LA County. And then I think another populous city had it as high as I think 14. It was really wide in terms of how many people have it, and it also probably depends on what pockets of the population are being studied more and being pulled from in order to conduct those types of tests anyways. And you have to wonder if Black communities are going to be being underrepresented even in those trial studies.
Yeah, because a lot of times those communities or communities of color, period, that requires you to go in, you have to go into I was just saying, go into places where those folk are, as opposed to thinking that they're going to somehow surface on the precise place that you said this this test or this thing is going to happen.
Yeah,
it's just not. It's not how to reach a lot of those kinds of those populations.
Yeah, it's really wow.
And then the history of what happens when you present yourself in hospitals and things. Anyways, Black people of color have been subject to testing and trials and things that have not worked out well for them as a people. You know what I'm saying? So it's already a level of, in some ways, sometimes it's a level of distrust that people may still have about these people who are, giving them this information. That's why, again, the messenger is important in some communities, so that they need to see it come from people that they actually trust.
Right.
With the information.
Yeah, that's so important. That not only the messengers, but even lots of the leadership can actually reflect their own needs and interests. That's really important and valuable.
Yeah. So there's a pandemic, though. It's a very good exposure to all of the things that you've been talking about in this conversation.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And how have you been spending the quarantine?
In my house, in the house, but luckily being in Florida, it's a different kind of thing, because you can always be outside, and that's not the weather's nice. You can go, walking or I have a garden and the things that I do out in my yard, so I can do all of those kinds of things. So I don't feel totally confined. It's odd not to have the routine I had in terms of going to campus or actually going to work or whatever. But feeling totally confined, I don't feel that. I feel a little bit more freedom, because actually, I have so many things that now a lot of those things are totally off the plate, because they're just not traveling and all kinds of other things that I would do. Mostly travel. I travel a lot. So that is it's off the table. So it's kind of a relief in the sense that it gives me a pause that I don't have to explain. It's like you don't have to explain anything about why you aren't going anywhere.
Extended vacation.
Yeah, everybody's not going. No one's going anywhere really. So
Yeah.
So that part is a relief. But on the flip side, not being able to travel and not being able to get to places and to family and things like that. That's kind of hard because being someplace that different from where the majority of my family is, it's hard in that regard.
Right.
Luckily, everybody is pretty much in my immediate family. Everybody's healthy, so I don't feel like stressed about their health. I just feel like I just want to, be closer when you're isolated or have to stay put. It's good to kind of be with your group or your family and stuff, and sort of or close enough that you can see them. So that's hard. That's the hardest. I think that's the hardest part about this pandemic and being somewhere else that my family is not at.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've been able to like communicate with your family in other ways? Because I know a lot of people are doing Zoom conversations and even like playing games over chat. I don't know if you've gotten into any of those.
I'm on Zoom. I'm on Zoom and social media overload too. So sort of I know it's good for connection, but now that it's also become an area for work, it's like, oh God, I don't really want to spend an extended amount of time Zooming and doing all that stuff, because now it reminds me of work. Because when I get on, it's for a meeting or doing my class or something. So now it's really it's a little hard, but I think now I appreciate the telephone more. Like being able to talk, talk even just to have the speakerphone and have conversations where it's like simple.
Yeah.
Call up, you hear voice, you could communicate. You don't have to do any of the stuff, and you don't have to feel the kinds of pressures maybe to keep the line up and all those kinds of things. So it's just it's a different kind of thing. I appreciate phone more.
Yeah, it's definitely simpler. Just have the phone. Something about the Zoom conversation now, hitting into like this 6th week that we're doing it. It just feels like draining. I don't want to be doing it in class setting anymore.
Right? No, it's right. And somebody was telling me it's like Zoom or these kinds of things. All of the stress and the engagement overhead, but none of the actual advantage. You don't really get the personal contact in the degree. Like you get none of the really touchy-feely kind of things that you get with a real direct interaction. So you kind of get a screen, and there you are, and you are kind of get your psychologically, you're kind of wanting some more engagement, but and ultimately it's just a screen.
Yeah. It's even worse than like a class if you have like 7 of you there. It's like Zoom wasn't meant for interaction; it was meant for presentation. So it's like I can kind of tune out when I get in the class. Just
yeah. No,
I like I just told on myself there, but
I know. Hey, I know that's what's happening. No news to a professor. No news. It's the end of the semester, so it's only a week to go. So chalk it up to the pandemic.
Oh God.
But no. So that's. So it's hard. It's strange now with this technology. It's good, but then it's exposing its limits.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. I guess it's exposing all of our limits in lots of ways.
Yeah.
This pandemic.
Yeah. And I think what I got from my undergrads, which I like, I'm going to use it now because they are so appreciative of the library, and actually, they're like, oh, we missed the library, we missed being able to go and study, and like they really are longing, for spaces where they could actually physically be, either, even if they're working alone, but they're in, in community, in a setting, that they have access to, materials they need, or other people if they want to talk to or not, but they just miss being able to go. And I didn't realize how, I mean, I did, but I didn't realize for students how, especially undergrads, how intimate they were. And, they didn't either, I don't think, that the library was to them.
Yeah.
Just something like that, something simple like just the library.
Yeah. Like the social aspect, even in learning,
Yes.
is this huge thing. Like, that makes sense. Yeah. I know for us grad students, like being able to have the lounge and be able to talk to our classmates between classes or after classes or just when we're just hanging out, like that's an important like aspect of like, talking about some of the material, and not getting that has been different.
The check-in, the ability to check in with people. And then so sometimes you don't want to be something happens in a moment that you don't need. That's, if you aren't face to face, it wouldn't happen or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's so true.
So it's been a challenge. I think this next semester, summer, will be harder than fall. I mean, than spring was, for this online remote teaching. I was just thinking the fact that we had like 3/4 of the semester face to face. So you built a rapport. So when I'm engaging with students, at least I know them. Like, I know their personality. I know the personality of the class, and the class really knows each other, in a different way. So even if you're just online, you still have a feel of, who that person is, and the relationship you kind of had built with them before you had to totally do this. But,
that's true.
But when this summer happens, when all the classes are starting out online, if you're not signing up for an online class, but it's going to be an online class experience, because you really won't know the people at all.
Yeah, it's really incredible. It's like there's a lot of like online classes being offered through websites like Coursera and other ones that like already have that format where you don't really talk to people face to face. It's always through like text or maybe videos, but like having that is a completely different experience. It's like by no means in any way the same. It's completely different. And I know that universities are having to see how they're going to be like tuition charges. I know there was talks about refunding part of the tuition because it wasn't the campus experience that students paid for.
And
that's going to be interesting.
And the dorm fees for people who were
right.
All those kinds of things probably have to be refunded, or something has to be thought of about. Maybe they apply it to the next semester or something. I don't know.
Again, like money becomes the bottom line.
Again, money. It's like the airlines. You are not getting your money back. Plus, we're going to charge you a change fee.
Exactly.
So, but that's all the stuff coming up in the fall. Like, the whole big question is, what is the fall offering going to look like? Is it going to be like the summer model, this model we have now that we're in? So that's the $1 million question right now. And AAA is even American Anthropology Association. It's really even trying to figure out what they're going to do about their upcoming conference in November.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's going to be. I wonder if what is it? Because I was reading something that said it might even last until 2022, like sort of the quarantine, or at least like having maybe this semester quarantine and maybe not this one. And I wonder if that kind of like staggered schedule could be applied to like a single semester, where it's like classes are meeting only like these weeks face to face, and maybe not these weeks. So maybe they're going to be like less people on campus.
That may be a scenario. That may be a scenario, because at that point, it's sort of like this semester, but more planned out, because then so, and it would allow people to utilize the buildings and get some kind of a on-campus experience.
Right.
But but without testing, again, you don't really. I don't. You still. I think certain classrooms too. I was talking to somebody. Certain classrooms would be off the table because the air circular, the quality of they're small, or the quality of air circulation is
Yeah.
already not good. So you don't want to
Yeah.
be in this kind of situation and be in a small place with not a good circulation. So maybe they would even have to evaluate what classrooms are conducive, if they are even going to have people taking, on campus, actually having the campus experience.
Yeah. That's really, I wonder, this might be out there, but what about VR? Like people put on the goggles and they're in the classroom. They can see the people next to them. I don't know if that's a little bit too much, but
that is it. There we go. That's taking it up to the next level.
Yeah. You can be as close as you want if it's VR.
Yeah.
Right here.
VR and you have a head thing and the eye thing, and something over your nose and everything else.
Yeah.
Yep. That really could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, like, of course, good luck, next semester. And I know, like, being chair in the beginning of and in the intermediary of a pandemic's got to be challenging, but
it will be. It will be. And like I said, I just hope to give people room to, or flexibility. Being flexible, I guess, is going to be the big component of how to operate in that situation. And hopefully listening to people with good ideas about how to manage, or how to help people manage. But like I said, I think we are in a strong at USF and in our department. I think we have a good base to work from. So I think it's possible. We'll definitely get through it, and I think we'll get through it in a better shape than most people probably think at first blush. I think things that need to change will be changed. That's all part of it. And so we'll see. I mean, like I said, hopefully everybody comes with that kind of attitude that that think about other people besides their own personal needs, and are willing to be flexible, because that's where we are right now.
Having to be flexible. That's a good way of thinking of it.
And I think the university at the university level so far has done a pretty good job of relaxing some of the standards, or some of the things that are criteria, like the evaluations. I think those are optional. Students could do differences in the types of grades they get. They can do pass, not pass, as opposed to grade.
Right.
I think that that they've done those kinds of things to relieve some of the pressures that people are evaluated against, given given people's inability to really control any of some of their environment in which they're learning or teaching.
Yeah, that's so true. It's good.
Yeah.
That kind of flexibility. And it's going to be interesting to see what comes of it and how long it lasts, because I think that's the thing that's been on my mind. Like, if it lasts till the fall, like, what's that going to look like? Because I know funding in universities is already diminished, and it's only going to go lower.
Right. Don't even talk to me about that's the thing. Budget becomes the thing. It's already tight, and it's from this new positions level, thinking about the budget as for a totality of a department, department wise, and the things that have to be give and take around programs and access and things like that. So you'll have a set budget, and it's getting I'm watching it shrink before my eyes. So that's going to be a challenge. Definitely.
I guess in terms of your work and even anthropology in general, the department at USF, is there anything else that you'd like people to know about any of it?
I mean, I think, and I want people to know that, and this is the thing I'm stressing for the new team, and then moving forward, is that you know, we have to be in a position to. My work reflects the fact that I look at people who have been thinking of things that have been, as they call it, third space. People who have operated in critique of a system or outside of a system in which they have been marginalized, and they've, seen ways to engage with that system and then also create change, create movement within that system that opens it up to more opportunities for a broader range of people. And I think those kinds of ways that I've written about and watched or worked in communities with, those are the kinds of things I think inside of the department I want to, emphasize that, we don't have to, always do things in the way it had previously been done. And we really need to really start looking at models of people who have acted that have been maybe silenced voices or marginalized within systems who offer a, a way to move forward, especially in these kinds of situations when it's been high stress or high lots of things in the way of blocking movement. And so we are at that stage where there are obstacles that seem quite daunting. Yeah. But it is these communities that have been often marginalized or underrepresented or not, or silenced, or we don't really go to them. This is the time. These are the communities. These are the things that we need to pay more attention to, and give ourselves the freedom to operate differently, even maybe against the grain, but at least think about things that don't go in lockstep to the status quo, because at this point the system has been exposed to its failures, and we don't. This is a time to think about how to make a change that you don't repeat. And so I want to give people in the department or people who at this moment in time that kind of flexibility to think like that, and to reach for those kinds of things, to at least offer them to try if that's what, if they have an idea from a place that's not typically something that we pay attention to. This is the time to think about that and give voice to those kinds of things. And I want to encourage people to, try some of these things that have been kind of maybe back burner or just not center stage in the department or in the university, period. And that's the kind of thing I just want to leave people with, the fact that it's open. I'm open to those kinds of thinkings and those kinds of strategizing. So, we can always, well, I don't know if we can go back anymore, but, but it's always, easier to get in line if you have to, but it's harder. And now we have the time to think about things that really would make it better for how do we want to build for a longer term interaction if we really want to expand opportunities for a larger group of people and introduce different ways of doing things. It's time, and I'm interested and I'm open, and so I think that's what the message is that I want to leave, that this is the time you can think about new ways of doing things or different, and let's give it a try. I mean, I'm going to keep the basic ship running. I'm not going to throw the doors open and hopefully we meet the budget. No, that part is going to be running solid. I'm talking about, how do we want to grow, and how do we want to build beyond just the core of keeping the basic ship floating. I mean, we're going to do that. I'm not going to, all of that. My business sense will require that we will keep ourselves afloat. But I'm talking about how do we, really create something different, or create something that we all would like to see and participate in, that would create a space for a larger amount of people, or different people in a different way. So that's, beyond the basics. Like, what do we want to do?
Yeah, it's like an opportunity for innovation. It sounds
yeah. So
that makes complete sense.
Yeah. So that's what I say. Creative change. People, it's time to. This is the time. If you have some really good ideas and you want to give it a shot, this is the moment. Like I said, it's not gonna. I'm not gonna try to we'll have the basics, but now it's time to do beyond the basics if people want to consider that. It'll be a platform.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these kinds of things you're doing is one of the, these are the kinds of platforms and forums where people really need to, think of new ways to do, use technology to get our anthropology out there. I want anthropology like at the site of the conversation, not like an afterthought.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of the things that stand out from reading any like ethnography, especially like yours that has such rich narratives and perspectives, and then being able to combine that with like thinking about theory, which tends to be embedded in like really like critical thinking and almost philosophical thinking in a lot of ways, like how those different things like intersect, and they intersect with daily lives for everybody. Like that's just so rich, and really getting it out there is just an important aspect of that.
Yeah. So I'm going to look to graduate students more too, because they, they're the people that are out on the way out there, closer to, the community and people and the new things and that are happening, and they have to be. You have to be for your own survival as a professional. So you got to take advantage of that and also encourage folk to be out in community and in conversation to make sure anthropologists have a place and are seen as valid participants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That sounds really awesome. Well, thank you so much for making the time, and I hope you have a wonderful summer. I don't know if you have any summer plans or if they've been changed up.
Transition, everybody transition. No, well, hopefully when travel opens up, I'll get some trips in, but we'll see. But that all the plans are in flux right now. So
I guess as well as they should be.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah. So I wish you luck, and I'm glad that you have, stepping up for lots of different things in the department. So I'm very excited and happy for your participation. And
absolutely. I'm excited too.
Ambassadors.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate you reaching out, you giving me opportunities, and even giving me the opportunity to interview you and talk to you about all this.
Yeah. Good. Well, you have a good rest of the day and end of the semester. Hopefully it ends strong.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you too.
Okay. And definitely, well, we can talk offline. Okay.
All right.
About next steps.
Sounds good.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye.